Ready? 3, 2, 1. Good morning and welcome to First Friday. I hope you all get a chance to enjoy the unseasonably warm early November weather today and this weekend. It was an historic night last night, and history is continuing to unfold today. But I'm glad we have this moment to reflect and share a little bit outside of the electoral urgency we've all felt this week. So today we're going to hear from two of our undergraduate fellows, Nola Prevost and Katherine Reardon, and they're going to speak to you a bit about their projects. I'll introduce them both, and then Nola's going to speak first, and then Katherine. So Nola Prevost of Brewer, Maine, is an English major concentrating in creative writing and minoring in women's, gender, and sexuality studies. Her Humanities project builds upon her interest in the historic use of fairy tales to represent social issues and moral messages, and she'll tell us more about that in just a minute. And then we'll hear from Katherine Reardon, who is an English major with a minor in political science and hails from Westwood, Massachusetts. Katherine is spending her fellowship working on her project, and she's going to tell us a little bit. It explores family stories, truth, and memory. Thank you, Nola and Katherine. So Nola, you go ahead first.
Hi, yeah, so I'm Nola, like you said, and my project, I'm super excited about it because it combines a lot of my, well, really both of my loves of creative writing and women's and gender studies, and feminist theory and queer theory. Those are two things that I've always been really passionate about. So being able to look at them through this new lens of fairy tales, something that's like this genre that stretches back for hundreds of years, and how each of the tales that get told reflect the times that they are being written in. And so a lot of the work that I've been doing so far, this is my first semester of this project, of this fellowship. So far I've been doing a lot of reading and research, looking at how fairy tales have been used, and fables in general, even extending to ancient mythology, like seeing what they sort of bring to the table and how people are thinking about their social world. One of the big key themes of fairy tales being that they were originally being used in sort of bourgeoisie salons that were essentially acting as sort of etiquette guides in certain settings, while others were folk tales that were used to sort of sometimes be scary stories to tell children to sort of encourage them to behave, or sometimes they were being used to guide teenagers through figuring out courtship and courtship rituals. Like, they were essentially being used as almost instruction manuals, but taking a lot of creative liberties with them. And they were, not only for children, but also, especially in salon settings, they were also being used for adults. And so there was this really great opportunity to look at it as a lens of like how in society, what morals am I really interested in, and values that are especially characteristic of feminist theory and queer theory. How can I use the fairy tale genre to express those ideas and those values? And so that's something that I've been really thinking about in the past couple of months. And so the writing that I'm working with, and I'm really thankful to be working with my advisor, Holly Adams, who's an English creative writing professor. And she's been really helpful in not only helping me, guide me towards readings that are really going to be beneficial, but also giving a second look at all of the writing that I ended up sending her. And so a lot of them are going to be taking place as just short stories. Others might imbue a little bit more of a hybrid prose poetry kind of feel. But I'm both interested in fiction and poetry, so I want to combine both of them and really explore both of their genres and how they can be helpful in terms of a fairy tale. Yeah, and so it's been a really cool experience to be able to look at all of this writing, especially, thinking about how fairy tales, like, in Disney works, all of them are really based on different fairy tales, and how they have come to shape how children think about the world and interact with others because they've been so influential. The stories that are being told are really powerful. And they've changed over time, and iterations of the same stories have changed over time. So seeing how those end up reflecting societal values and how they have changed in recent years, especially, that's been really cool to look at. Yeah, so I'm super grateful for the opportunity, and I can talk about it more if you'd like. Or we can move on to Katherine, however you'd like.
I think either way.
Let's move. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Karen. So.
I had kind of figured that both of you would talk a little about your research, and then when you both finish, that attendees could ask some additional questions.
Sure.
Great.
Cool.
Katherine, hello.
Hello. Yeah, I'm Katherine, and I'm also in my first semester of research, like Nola. For my research, I'm specifically focusing on the idea of family stories and genealogy. It came from a semester abroad I was doing in Ireland during the beginning of the pandemic, which is where most of my family's from, specifically my dad's side of the family. And I was like living and studying in the same part of the country that family was from. So I was planning to do a lot of genealogical research over there and then write about it when I came back. But when COVID hit, that really changed. So in doing that, I changed gears into just thinking about family stories. Unfortunately, this side of my family had all died before I was born. So they've only existed to me through passed down family stories with varying degrees of truth, I've come to find out since doing research into them. And I wanted to really explore how they've affected me and how they affect my opinion of all these people, which has been very interesting to consider. So far throughout the semester, I've really just been writing what I know about anyone in my family. So it's been so far it's just been a series of vignettes telling basic family stories. One of them, off the top of my head, I was always told my great-grandmother was the first female vice cop in the United States. I have since found out that was a really good story, but not very truthful. So what I'm doing is considering, what does that matter if it's truthful or not? Still a very good story. I'm also actually working with Holly Adams. This project is doubling as my honors thesis, so I had to form a committee, and Holly Adams is going to be on my committee, so I'm really glad to hear how much Nola likes her. And yeah, it's kind of the gist of it.
Wonderful. Well, do either of our board members have questions for our fellows about their research or about other things about their time at UMaine?
I do. Katherine, where in Ireland are you centering your work?
Cork City, Ireland. It's where I was living, where I was studying, and it's where I've been told about 75% of my family was from. Over there, I found out that my last name, Reardon, was actually the most common last name in Cork itself. So good guess to assume we were right on that one.
And when did the first Irish Americans show up here?
It depends. Most of it for my family goes as far back as the potato famine for pretty much everyone else, but it goes all the way up to World War I, so between that age range.
And there are so many resources available, overwhelming amount of resources available for genealogical studies. I imagine clearing the debris to get to exactly what you really want must be difficult, especially with a common name like Reardon.
Yes, it's definitely been an experience looking for stuff like that. Specifically, everyone in my family has the same name of at least 2 other members of my family. So figuring out all that stuff has also been its own struggle, but it's really, I've always really been interested in genealogical research from the side of my family. So I really enjoy it in addition to writing about it. So it's good work, but I think it's worth it.
And I'm glad to know that you're open to stories, that fiction is okay, because there's plenty available, probably more available than, and there's such a wonderful strain of Irish writers who've, pursued similar paths. Are there any that you really admire that you'd like to emulate, or that inspire you? Irish writers, I mean.
Yeah, that's actually funny you say that. This week I started looking into Irish writers a lot more for my thesis itself. I'm looking at Yeats a lot because I ended up spending a lot of time studying him when I was in Ireland, but I also am going to, I want to start looking at Joyce a bit more. He talked about history as something he's trying to escape, and I think that's a very interesting thing to go off of. I'll admit I haven't read as much Joyce as I think I should as a good English major and as a good Irish kid, but that's definitely something I want to look into moving forward, and any recommendations I'm happy to look at.
Katherine, you
Yep.
might like to talk to Ardina Hamlin, who is a novelist who started out doing her family history. She lives in Hamden now and was a Bangor Daily News columnist for a while, but she couldn't find a lot of information that she wanted about her family, most of it about the women in her family. So she decided that she would make it up and write a novel, and it turned into a trilogy, and it's actually been republished at least once, maybe more than once. So your chances for turning stories into fiction, even if they are fiction, it's an option.
It's really cool. Thank you. I'll look into that. I found that we don't know much about the women in my family in general.
Well, that's what, just talking to her, you would get some ideas, because she said I could separately give you her email address and so forth if you wanted to reach out and get some ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love that.
Let's hear from Nola a little bit about talk a little bit about more about the fairy tales in the context of feminist and queer theory.
Yeah, so so far I've read and my final project, my final work is going to be a collection of short stories inspired by feminist and queer theory. And so I've been looking at a couple other collections so far that have been written by contemporary feminist authors. And there's been they've definitely taken on different writing styles from, very different from the Grimm's brothers versions, and some of them have taken, directly inspired from those stories and then changed certain parts of it to represent women in a new, different way. And so something that I've been thinking about a lot is how, especially in those stories, how women are being represented and how they're being, talked about. Like when they're first introduced as characters, are they described because of through their body? Are they described through how they look, or are they described through actions, through things of their personality? Are they being described as pretty and demure, or are they being described as smart or clever or brave? There's certain things like that that have been really fascinating to think through, and then, apply to my own writing. And also things like, how are they being represented to the audience, and how is the audience meant to feel about them? And so that's something that I've been thinking about in terms of just women's representation, but also queer representation. Thinking about how there's always like the happy end of the fairy tale that everyone gets married and lives happily ever after, but a lot of them are heterosexual marriages between one boy and one girl, and that's supposed to be the ultimate goal that they're heading towards. But I'm really interested in looking at stories that take a different approach to it, and writing stories that have queer representation, having two girls fall in love or two boys fall in love, or having different representations of gender and what that means. I'm really trying to explore through these stories what these different characters can and should look like in popular folk tales or fairy tales.
Nola, what cultures are you exploring? Are there are you primarily European? Or are you going broader than that?
Yeah, I'm looking. A lot of the texts that I've been able to find so far have been European, and considering that is a large part of the culture, I guess, like a large culture that influences our culture today. That's been something I've been looking at. A couple of the feminist writers that I've been reading thus far have been Canadian. And so there's a little bit of a different shift from American literature. But yeah, especially Western European, like Italy, Germany, a little bit of French stories like Beauty and the Beast and the original text for that. Yeah, so it's been largely European so far.
Who are the Canadian writers that you've studied?
Yeah, one of them is Angela Carter, and she wrote a series of stories, and the collection that she put together was called The Bloody Chamber and Other Stories, and that, I believe, was written in the 70s or 80s, and Holly Adams actually recommended it to me, and I read it over the summer. And that was really interesting because she took a little bit of a different approach than I was planning on taking, was taking older stories and rewriting them with a feminist lens, and largely looking at how women are being represented. And yeah, and then I was also looking at, I can't remember her name, but it was a really fascinating story. The collection was called Daydreams of Angels, and I know the writer's last name was O'Neill, and that was written within the past couple decades, at least I believe in the 2000s, but I have to check back on that. But that was taking the feminist and fairy tale genre and looking at stepping further away from the stories that have already been written and rewriting, writing new stories and developing new sort of folk tales with sort of the plot points that take place throughout fairy tales, but applying them to a contemporary world, and using that as the setting, and that was also really fascinating.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
Nola, what product where are you headed with your work? Actually, for Katherine and Nola, what do you expect to end up with when you're done?
Yeah, so I am planning on having a collection of short stories, fairy tales, and I'm expecting to have at least 10 to 15 of them. Each of them are going to be varied in length, so I'm still looking around with that, but that's the ultimate goal anyway. And then I am also interested in, for my dissemination of the project, doing a reading on campus, hopefully, if if the pandemic is lightening up by then, that would be wonderful. But and doing a sort of follow-up essay on what I've learned about the fairy tale genre and how it's applied to my work and all of that.
Mine's going to be kind of similar. Actually, I'm planning to have a series of short essays varying in length, kind of focusing on different characters and themes, each one depending on what I find out about different family members. And then if I could have my way, I'd also love to do a reading of these essays on campus, but who knows what the world will be looking like in April, so let's see.
You can always do it virtually.
I think I have a question for both of you. It's always interesting to me to see how the fellows ended up becoming the fellows, and I don't know if there was a particular draw for either of you. Maybe it's a creation story that I could appreciate, but I just wondered, what led you to want to pursue the fellowship and to end up with the product that you both just talked about?
One of the honors associates last year, Kim Crowley, was one of the first fellows, and she heavily advertised this fellowship in all of our thesis prep classes. So someone should give her an award for that. I feel like half the applications came from her. But it worked out that it was one of the first emails I saw when I got off the plane from Ireland was Kim Crowley saying, this is due in 2 weeks. You should apply for it. I think you'll do a great job. And it worked out. So nothing but thanks for her for that.
Yeah, for me, I had Jennifer Moxley to thank. She was my poetry workshop teacher last semester, and I'm taking her advanced poetry workshop this semester. And I believe she used to be on the committee for applications. I know she used to be involved. And she advertised it to our class and was like, the deadline's still coming up. Everyone should apply. And so that was something that kind of sparked my interest. Like, maybe, $4,000 a semester might not be too bad. Like that. And so then I was thinking about it, and especially I was working on a lot of just personal poetry at the time. And so doing something with creative writing would have been, it just sounded like, oh, geez, that would be really cool. And yeah, so that's kind of where I got that. And once I met with her and talked with her a little bit about the opportunity, I was like, okay, yeah, I definitely got to apply. Why not?
You wouldn't have one of those poems to read, would you?
I could. I have some of them written thus far, still in rough draft form. But I could pull them up if you guys are interested. All right.
Sure.
Sure. Let me look through my million folders on Google Drive and see what I can find.
And maybe while Nola does that, Katherine, I'm always curious, what does your family think about this? Are there other people in your family that are like, God, I've always wondered if that was true, or other people that question why you need to get into it further, or what is their reaction like so far?
Yeah, my dad's the most interested in it by far. It's his family. So every time I talk to him about it, he'll remember something else that he's somehow never told me in 21 years, about his aunt, which we didn't really know about. He'd never spoken about before. So it's interesting doing that. And my mom's been really intrigued by it because she knows absolutely nothing. My dad's parents were dead before my parents even met. So everything she learns is new information. She enjoys it, but yeah, that's really it. I'm kind of what am I trying to say? There's not a ton of people on that side of the family to kind of fight me on it, which is a little sad, but it's interesting learning about it. And my grandmother on my mother's side is very interested in all of this and is very excited about the fellowship and reads the newsletters every week. So.
Have you thought about incorporating them at all into an end presentation or reading or panel or something, of somehow working in your family members or getting them to talk about a story? Or
I've been considering it. Mostly I go back and forth on it because they're far away. One of the things, so it'd be hard to get them up here, but maybe trying to get one of my family, my dad, my brother, my sister, to maybe write something about it after having read everything and see what their reaction was. I think could be interesting to include, unless they hate it, because then I won't include it at all. But yeah, I'm considering it. I think it could be I'm trying to think of the right word. I think it could really bring it full circle to do that.
I just think we have one of our other fellows who's not here, who's graduating soon, who's going to be incorporating some family members into some poetry reading that she's doing, and having, I think her mom's reading one and her favorite female professor is reading one. So she has like different women in her life that she's asking to read poems. And so I just think it's interesting to rope in those that are close to you, but not necessarily, you know, families often don't get the full story about what we're doing. They know you're doing research, but to actually be able to share it with them and integrate them into the conversation, I think is interesting. Nola, did you find a good one that you feel good about sharing?
Yeah, I think so. I had this one workshopped actually in my class, so I've gotten several pairs of eyes on it. Still working on some parts of it, but I feel pretty comfortable about it. This one is called The Magician, the Assistant, and the Crowd. The crowd gawks at your stardust hands, but I know the mirrors for the smoke. I oiled the hinges on the trapdoor. I was test subject and assistant. I want to unhook your mask. Let loose the doves, free the rabbit backstage. They don't see the strings, for they are blinded by the crystals in your eyes. For my next trick, I will make this rabbit disappear. With a wave of your gloves, the animal bursts into flames and is gone. The crowd roars. Don't they see the ash? Don't they know the hidden cage is vacant? We all want so badly for this to be a trick. We will the witchcraft out of you. They don't want to see the toys for the real hot iron magic. But like you promised, the rabbit disappeared. Isn't that what they paid for? Thank you. That is snaps all around. Yeah, that one I'm really fascinated by some of the experiences I had doing the hotline training at Partners for Peace my senior year in high school, and I learned a lot from that. So I'm always interested about discussions about relationships and power dynamics between between romantic partners, and that's something that always sneaks its way into my writing. So that's one piece that I'm really interested in including.
I have one other here. After you just shared a poem, it made me, and you mentioned before, Katherine, that you're pairing this with your honors thesis. Would either or both of you had gone, pursued this work if not for the fellowship, or did it really allow you to do it, or some combination of both?
It's definitely something that I would have eventually probably done in my lifetime, but it definitely would have taken longer because I would have to have dedicated much of my time over to my classes, and then eventually when I graduated have to get a job and figure out that kind of balance. I've always been interested in being a novelist and a poet, and so that's like ultimately a goal in my life, but it might have taken, years of just like finding a half hour here or 20 minutes there, trying to like sit down and write everything. So I think the opportunity of having time has been really, it's been fantastic to actually like sit down and be like, wow, I'm actually able to get this all done. Yeah, so I think without the fellowship, it definitely wouldn't have been this year that I would have been able to sit down with this, especially with the opportunity of having all of the resources available, and my advisor and also all of the other fellows to talk to. Like that would have been a very different experience.
I think so that this was going to be my honors thesis for 2 years now. So I think in some form I still would have done this project, but specifically the way I'm presenting it wouldn't have been the same. I would have just done my thesis defense, get it bound and kind of leave it somewhere. Being part of the fellowship means I I'm going to present it to actual people and get feedback on it. And that's definitely changed the way I look at it. It's probably changed how I might still work on this after. Like, the goal with every creative project is to eventually publish it. And because I'm doing it for the fellowship, I think there's more of a reality I might do that at some point than if it was just my honors thesis.
Is there a piece of it that you could share with us?
I will look through my Google Docs in a minute or two.
While you're looking, can anybody hear me? Yes, okay. While you're looking, for both of you, my question is, what's life like going to college in this season of COVID?
It's been it's been a time, definitely. It's been an experience.
And what year are you in now?
I'm a fourth year. This is my last year.
So you know what it should be like.
Yeah. No, I'm thankful that this isn't my first year. I can only imagine what that would be like. I know my first year I was like, oh, I don't know where anything is. And and so now that I know what it's supposed to be like and what it feels like now, I'm very grateful that I've taken online classes before, because now a majority of them are online. And I'm also very grateful that I've so far been able to keep going with the workload, despite all of it being online. And I know that's more of an exception rather than the rule for most students. And I had a former roommate that really struggled at the end of last semester, because just the amount of online work was terrifying to him, and it drove him a little bit insane. So I can imagine that. Currently I'm taking 13 credits. I used to take 15 credits, but because I took some classes in high school and took a few more extra credits, my first couple years I got to get a little bit of a break this semester. And so I've been sort of taking on the fellowship, sort of thinking of it as like a fifth class, essentially, and trying to, think about it in terms of a syllabus and getting everything done. But yeah, like the online experience has definitely made me feel a little more like obviously disconnected from everything else, especially in my asynchronous classes, because I'm not actively like engaging with the other students, or really like meeting with or talking with the professor. And I was always kind of like the teacher's pet in high school, so like this is very different where I'm like, oh no, I'm not seeing anybody. One of my classes I'm meeting in person, but once a week anyway, and then the other half were online. And so we're constantly sort of in this dialogue about how the class is feeling and how everything's run, definitely because it's a very unprecedented time. No one knows exactly what the right way about this is, but yeah, like I said, I'm thankful that I have an easier time than others, I guess, looking at the online classes, but yeah, it's definitely been challenging in other ways for sure.
Katherine, how about you?
It's definitely an experience. This semester I think is easier for me than last semester, because I was taking classes in a different country in a different time zone, and I had to get up at 4 a.m. to turn everything in. So I mean, this is a walk in the park, but it's definitely different. I'm taking an asynchronous class, a science class, and there's a reason that I'm an English major and that I don't do sciences. And this semester has proven it to me. But yeah, we're getting through it like we have to, but it's definitely some of the most difficult semesters of my life. The next semester is definitely not going to be any easier, so just got to do it.
Well, I don't want to keep you too long, but I would love to hear a little bit of what Katherine has written, if you have an opportunity to share. And then after that, you're welcome to stick with us as we talk about a couple of events and other things coming up. But I understand if you have to drop off the call as well.
Yeah, I did find something. This one I wrote, so everything's just kind of like a long vignette, more like prose and poetic than formal essays. But this one I specifically wrote about my dad's dad, my grandfather. All right. Michael John Reardon, or John Michael Reardon, depending on who you ask, enlists in the Air Force. George, his brother, has already done this, and it doesn't seem like the worst idea. There doesn't seem to be a lot of options for kids like him, and this is something. What is a kid like him? Kids that leave high school, kids that aren't qualified for a lot, kids that leave high school to work to help their father support their family, kids that will do that by any means necessary, whatever that means. George goes Navy, maybe because he likes boats, and maybe because the Navy recruiter was the first one he saw. Michael, however, finds the Air Force recruiter. He also might have just liked planes. He ends up in bombardier training. No, he doesn't. He's 6 feet tall, and we read somewhere that bombardiers are small, 5'3" or something like that. He flies the planes. No, he doesn't. It feels wrong. He trains dogs. I don't know why the Air Force needs dogs, but he trains them. Maybe he doesn't actually train them, but he at least goes to a few days of training. He gets the gist of it. He trains his own dogs in the exact same way that the Air Force did, and his son does it too. He takes something from his time in the Air Force. He isn't like George, though. He doesn't last. Barely lasts the war, if at all, leaves with what is likely a dishonorable discharge. He drives trucks and stays almost associated with the local Teamsters union, but not officially. It doesn't call to him like it calls to George, I think. They're different, like brothers often are.